Hello, my name is Caroline Hawthorne, and I am the pastor at Hunt Memorial United Methodist Church. And I also helped to start the Proverbs 3:27 Mission Center. I have been at Hunt for 9 years. The Proverbs 3:27 Mission Center is a place for homeless folks to come and get out of the weather. We provide accommodations during inclement weather, and not overnight accommodations, but during the day. It's kind of like a hangout, just a place for them to come during the day to get them off the streets. We do serve a hot meal, and we also take lunches out, usually a bag lunch, and go out into the streets and hand deliver those as well. We also have a small clothing closet, and we provide blankets and toiletries. At the Mission Center, we allow them to take showers and also to wash their clothes. So it's a very thorough ministry. My experience with COVID, when the pandemic first started, of course I was scared to death, and I took every precaution that was needed. Especially in my church, we social distanced. We had hand sanitizer everywhere. We even had gloves. We wore masks. We did have a mask protocol, and we took every precaution to be able to worship together. And early on, when they started offering the vaccines, I enrolled into a trial for a vaccine because I did not know how long it would be until I was eligible to get a vaccine. So I thought this way I could possibly get the vaccine early. And I received my vaccinations from the trial in December of 2020. I received the first one in December of 2020 and the second one in January of 2021. And it was a blind study. You didn't know if you actually received the vaccine or if you actually received a placebo. But I did this out of caution because I knew that I was vulnerable in working with the community that I work with, working with the homeless people who may not have an opportunity to be vaccinated. And so I tried to take every caution necessary to prevent myself from getting COVID. And my story starts a few days before Easter. There was a cold snap, and so we opened the church as a warming shelter during those days. And I can even remember on April Fool's Day, we were all sitting around, and a couple of the guys, well, all of them that were there that had stayed at the Salvation Army had a cough. And they just called it a kennel cough, and they joked about it, saying, "Oh yeah, I've got this kennel cough. We all have it from the Salvation Army." And one day, one of the guys literally slept on the floor. He said he didn't feel good, and he slept on the floor. And that was my first fear. I thought, oh my goodness, what if he has COVID? And, I thought it, didn't really think that he had it, but I did at the same time. Thankfully, I had worn my masks, and, being around them, I kept my distance. But we were in the same room together. So on Easter Sunday, I got up for sunrise service. We had a sunrise service, and then I preached at 2 churches that day. And I wasn't feeling the best, but I wasn't really feeling bad, or I wasn't feeling the worst either. I knew that I wasn't feeling good. And so when I got home from Easter service, I took my temperature, and it was 104. And so that immediately I knew that something was wrong. And I took the day and just rested. And since that was on a Sunday, very first thing Monday morning, I went to a clinic that offered the rapid test and paid to have the rapid test done, and within 10 minutes, it came back positive for COVID. I was terrified. I knew that this was not a good thing, and thankfully, my son had been on spring break that week, and I had not been around him. And so I decided to move into the mission center during that time so that I would not be around my son. And as the week went on, I progressively got worse. On the following Saturday, I was feeling so bad that I went to the hospital because I knew that I was dehydrated. I knew that, for the first week I had not been able to eat. I had barely been able to sleep. My fever ran 104 just about every day. I was taking Tylenol and ibuprofen every 2 hours trying to combat the fever and all the other ailments that went along with it. So Saturday I went to the hospital, to the emergency room, and they gave me fluids. And at that point, they told me that my pulse ox stat was a 90. And they said, normally, if it's below 90, we would put you on oxygen. And they said, but yours is right at 90, so we're not going to put you on oxygen right now. And they gave me the choice. Do you want to go home, or do you want to stay in the hospital? Well, of course I said I want to go home. So I went home, and the very next morning, the whole night actually, when I was at home that night, I could not breathe. And I was checking my pulse ox every, 20 minutes or so, and it was dropping, I think the lowest that it got was about 85 at that point. And so I knew that I needed oxygen at that point. So I went back to the emergency room, and they immediately admitted me and put me on the COVID wing. While I was on the COVID wing, my ox stats continually got worse, and it got to where I couldn't breathe. And at one point, they said that I was on 100% oxygen up on the regular COVID wing. And thankfully, God works in mysterious ways, and thankfully, my sister had a doctor friend that was actually a pulmonologist, and he just so happened to be working in Bristol at that time. So, just say that that's a God incident. It's not a coincidence. And so he immediately came and checked on me as soon as she got in touch with him. And he said, I'm sending you to the ICU. You need to be in the ICU. And he said, that way I can keep better eye on you, and they will take better care of you in the ICU. And so they transferred me to ICU. This was probably late Sunday evening. So I was in the COVID wing just for a day. And they transferred me to ICU. And they ended up having to put me on a BiPAP machine, which I'm not a doctor. I don't claim to be a doctor, but I knew that I was maxing out on the BiPAP machine as well. On Monday evening, they did allow my niece to come in and see me, which she is a registered nurse, and she knew how to gear up. They had to put on plastic and, headgear and masks and everything, gloves, and but they did allow her to come and see me. And she came in, and she said, Caroline, she said, you have to fight. She said, you've got to fight. And she said, they're talking about putting you on a ventilator. And she said, And they've even said that if you went on a ventilator, it would probably be very hard for you to come off of it. So I knew from that point what the doctors were thinking, and I was terrified. I've never been so sick in my life, and I mean, I've had some doozies, and I've seen people that are sick. I saw my husband go through cancer, and he ultimately passed away from it, but I know how sick he was, and I think that I was sicker than he was with cancer. A lot of people asked me if I was awake during this time, and I was awake, but I was very lethargic. I don't remember a lot about that time, thank goodness. I do remember praying a lot and talking to God a lot because I was in isolation. Basically, it was me and myself, me and God. And the nurses, every time that they had to come in, they had to gear up, they had to put on the protective gear. And so they didn't come in very much. They would come in and check my vitals, and then if I needed them, then they would come in. But it wasn't like a normal ICU by any means. And on Tuesday, my blood gas levels had bottomed out, and I was on the maximum on the BiPAP. And they came in and told me, we're getting ready to put you on a ventilator. And the doctor said, are you okay with that? And I can just remember looking at him and saying, I don't know, you have to check with my sister. And a few minutes later, my son was allowed to come and visit me. And the only reason that they let him come was because they were afraid he would never see me alive again if I went on the ventilator. So they permitted him to come, and of course he had to wear the gear, the protective gear. And it seemed like something out of a movie, a bad movie. And he just came in and grabbed my hand and he said, I just want you to know how much I love you. And he said, thank you for everything that you've ever done for me. That was it was definitely one of the hardest moments in my entire life. Just seeing him in the protective gear was awful, much less saying goodbye to him. As soon as he left the room, they came back and said that they were going to check my blood gases one last time before they put me on the ventilator. And miraculously, my numbers had come up. And they said, you don't have to go on a ventilator at this time. And I shouted out, thank you, God, right in the middle of the room. I just couldn't believe that I didn't have to go on a ventilator. And at the same time, there was a whole congregation, a whole army of prayer warriors that were praying for me and praying specifically that I would not have to go on a ventilator. And thanks be to God, I did not. Now, eventually, I got to the point to where I could come off of the BiPAP machine. It did take a couple of days for me to come off the BiPAP. And eventually, they were able to lower my oxygen. I think the max is like 15 liters or something like that. I'm not real sure. But I was on the maximum oxygen. And when I got down to about 6 liters of oxygen, they felt comfortable enough moving me to a regular room. And they did put me in a regular room. And, one of the hardest things for me was getting up to go to the bathroom. Even though it was, 6 feet away from the bed, it took everything I had out of me to get up and go to the bathroom. After they would come in and do physical therapy with me, and during that time, it would just absolutely exhaust me. As soon as they were done, I would probably sleep for 2.5 hours. It just really took everything out of me. And I then was well enough to go to rehab, so they sent me to a rehab facility. And there I, went through physical therapy as well as occupational therapy, making sure that I could take care of myself when I went home. And at this point, I was still on, 5 and 6 liters of oxygen. When I left the rehab facility, I was sent home on 3 liters of oxygen, and still had trouble doing things for myself. I had to go stay with my father, who is retired, for 2 weeks. And, I can remember the first time I took a shower at his house. Oh my goodness. It was, I kept thinking, I'm going to have to get my dad to come and give me a shower. It was so hard to do the simplest things on my own. And physical therapy did come to his house for the first couple of weeks that I was there, and they had me walk in his hallway back and forth, and it was maybe 20 feet long, and I can remember walking to the end of the hallway and getting out of breath, and they would turn my oxygen up so that I could catch my breath again. And, they told me then, they said, walking is going to be the best exercise for you. And so I would walk and walk, but I could walk maybe 20 to 30 feet at a time and then stop and have to catch my breath, even on oxygen. It got to the point where I reduced the oxygen. I was able to reduce it to 2 liters, and I was on 2 liters for quite a while. And my son got me out walking outside, and I can remember us going to White Top Park, one of the local parks, and walking on the sidewalk, and it took everything I had to do that. But we got to the point to where I could walk greater distances and have to stop and catch my breath, but I was able to do that. I actually just got a phone call just now, before I came in here, from my doctor's office. I have been on oxygen up until about 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, and they put me on the oxygen as needed, like when I'm walking, and at night when I sleep. And I just got a phone call that I could go off the oxygen at night. Praise be to God. 3 months ago, I never thought that I would come off the oxygen. And here I am, completely oxygen-free right now. And it's just something to celebrate. This disease, this virus, is horrible. I do have some mild scar tissue damage in my lungs, and they are trying to, I'm on a special inhaler to try to fix that, to try to fix my lungs. And even now, I still have mild restrictions in my lungs, in my lung capacity. But I'm just thankful to be alive. I did receive, when I was in the hospital, when I was in ICU, I did receive remdesivir, and I did receive the plasma with antibodies in it. And since I received that plasma with antibodies, they told me that I had to wait 3 months before I could get vaccinated. And so we counted it up one day at my doctor's office, my doctor and I did, and I received the antibodies on April 11th. And so she told me, she said, that means you can get vaccinated on July 11th. And July 11th was on a Sunday, so I went on Monday, July 12th, and received my first dose of the Pfizer vaccine. And 2 weeks later, I went and got my second dose, 2 or 3 weeks later, I don't remember. And so I am fully vaccinated now. I just cannot urge people enough. I cannot tell you enough how important that vaccine is. You don't want to go through what I went through. It's a terrible illness, and you know, like I said, April 4th, I think, was Easter, and today is August 16th. You know, that's 4 months. And when I was in the hospital, they told me it could take up to 6 months by the time I got out of there. But 4 months that this virus has robbed me of being able to breathe on my own.